presentation. Go on Mr. Jeff Robinson, or Dean. Ms. Robinson, I don't know if you were here earlier, but I will explain to you the process we're following today. It became very apparent yesterday during the presentations that our committee members have quite a few questions. As you can see, if you've seen the schedule, we've got a long way to go on a lot of things we hear from today, so we're trying very hard to stay on schedule within the allotted time for each presenter. You are scheduled, I believe, for 30 minutes, and so what we're going to do is here, we're going to stop at the halfway point, 15 minutes, and see what questions our committee members may have. And so I would encourage you to hit the high points quick, get them early, get to the meat of the presentation, and then we're going to stop at 15 minutes to see where we are and proceed in that fashion. So with that understanding, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will try my best to get you back on schedule. I don't anticipate taking 15 minutes to do my prepared remarks. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and talk about PERS and the plans we administer. With me today at the table are Greg Gregory, Chief Operating Officer, and Lori Tingle, PERS Chief Investment Officer. Just as the state of Mississippi has been affected by the economy, so has PERS. However, PERS remains financially stable, and the retirement benefits of our members and retirees are secure. As with other sectors of the economy, it is going to take time and patience before a significant improvement is seen in the PERS funded status. Today I will give you an update on the funded status of PERS, how we got there, and what has been done. Touch on the PERS budget and respond to any questions you may have. You've been provided with a folder that contains several documents relative to PERS. A replica of a dollar bill, which we refer to as the PERS buck, and shows the funding sources for the past 30-year period on the front and lists some pertinent facts. A small piece entitled, Who Are the Faces of PERS, which highlights some of our members and retirees and showcase the impact that they and PERS have on the state of Mississippi on a day-to-day basis. PERS 2014 budget request, PERS facts and figures booklet, and then a brochure on normal cost. Now let me share with you the importance of the benefits PERS provides and highlight some of the system statistics and demographics. We now provide payments to more than 91,000 retirees each month. The average annual benefit is a little more than $19,800, and the total annual payroll for fiscal year 2012 was $1.9 billion. Now, not only do these payments represent retirement security for the thousands of retired public employees, keeping many of them off public assistance, they also act as an economic engine to the state of Mississippi. Almost 93% of these payments, or almost $1.8 billion, remained in the state of Mississippi. And with these payments, retirees purchase goods and services, creating and supporting jobs, increasing profits and wages in the private sector, and increasing revenue in taxes and fees from the public sector. The PERS Facts and Figures booklet provides extensive demographic and statistical information, and I don't plan to go into all those numbers today. However, just to remind you, we are responsible for the administration of 25 programs and plans which serve a membership of almost 380,000 people. These plans include the Public Employees Retirement System, the Mississippi Highway Safety Patrol Retirement System, 19 closed municipal plans, the Supplemental Legislative Retirement Plan, the Optional Retirement Plan, which is a defined contribution plan available to teaching faculty and certain administrative positions at the institutions of higher learning in lieu of participation in PERS. The Mississippi Deferred Compensation Plan and Trust, which has assets of almost $1.3 billion and almost 40,000 participants, and sponsored retiree medical and life insurance plans. The graph on page 7 of the Facts and Figures booklets illustrates the growth in the membership over the past 10 years. And as of June 30, there were almost 163,000 active members covered by the plans administered by PERS. However, the number of active members covered is 5,000 less than in FY 2009 and follows the national trend as it relates to government employment. In the investment section, which starts on page 22, you will note our net assets as of June 30, 2012 were $20.1 billion. And our rate of return for this past fiscal year was 1.6%. I'm sorry, I said 1.6, I meant 0.6%. Reflecting the instability in the markets over the past year. And while providing a positive return, it was less than our assumed rate of return of 8%. However, our 3-year return is 12.9%, and over the past 30 years, the fund has earned 9.63%, exceeding the investment return assumption. And as of close of business Friday, for this fiscal year since June 30, our rate of return is estimated at 6%. So since July 1, we've earned, and our assets are 21.3. So we've earned an additional $1.2 billion since June 30. Again, reflecting the instability and the volatility in the markets today. Our 2014 budget request is included in the separate booklet and outlines our needs. We are requesting an operating budget in the amount of $14 million, most of which is in the category of personal services. This budget request is less than 0.1% of our total investment assets, and it's less than 1% of our total expenditures. It is also important to remember that our operating budget is funded from the trust, and we generate more money from ancillary investment income than we spend on our administrative budget. We receive no general fund monies for operations. Whatever we do not spend remains in the trust. We are conscientious in our expenditures and take our responsibility of trust seriously. In fact, we treat the expenditures as if the fund belonged to us, which actually they do. Each one of us has a vested interest in how we manage PERS. Now, as I mentioned, and you're all probably very much aware, PERS funding and sustainability has been the focus of a lot of attention over the past several years. And this is primarily a result of the fact that the contribution to fund the plan has increased from a total of 17% in 2004 to 23.26% today. And unfortunately, that rate is projected to increase for the next 2 years. The graph on page 30 illustrates the estimated projected increases. And you will note that it projects that the rate could decrease in FY 2016, illustrating that time, in conjunction with the changes that have been made to PERS, should address the current funding issue. However, the PERS board is cognizant of the impact the increase in the contribution rate has on employers who participate in PERS. And with that in mind, are reviewing the current funding policy with an objective of adopting a policy with a stable contribution rate that provides a sufficient level over time. And while it's unofficial at this point, the consensus of the board is to adopt a fixed contribution rate of 15.75%, which is projected to result in a funding ratio in excess of 80% within 30 years. PERS funded status as of June 30, 2011 was 62%, as indicated on the graph on page 26 and 27. And you will note that PERS funded status reached a high of 88% on an actuarial basis and 103% on a market value basis. However, you will also note the increase in the actuarial liability since 2002 as a result of the retroactive benefit increases passed in 1999, coupled with investment losses over that time period. Unfunded accrued liabilities occur as a result of actuarial losses, such as investment losses or actuarial experience, that is different from what is assumed, and are expected as projections, and these are expected as projections about future events cannot be predicted with 100% accuracy. However, to ensure sustainability, policies should be in place to mitigate accruing unfunded liabilities that will affect the employer's ability to adequately fund the benefits that have been promised. For example, granting retroactive benefits or early retirement incentives for which no employer or employee contributions are paid. PERS funded status as of 62% is not ideal. However, this represents the accumulation of 62% of the assets needed to pay the current future projected benefits, not the benefits due and payable today. As you heard me say earlier, PERS remains financially stable and the retirement benefits of our members and retirees are secure. However, as with other sectors of the economy, PERS will continue to feel the effects of what some are calling the Great Recession, and it will take time before real improvement is seen. Changes have been made to ensure the sustainability of our plan, increasing the vesting period, increasing retirement eligibility combined with the reduction in the benefit formula, stricter provisions relative to reemployment and increased contributions. And these will, given time, improve the funded status of PERS. At this time, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson. Very good presentation. We appreciate that. I recognize Representative Flags for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You indicated that the returns on money on the investment was I guess that's 0.63.
0.60%.
What was that number? In 2011.
FY 2011, 25.4%.
So we went from 25.4 to 0.63% in a year.
That's correct. And the graph on page 22, we'd like to look at, shows the discrete returns since 1981 on an individual year-by-year basis.
You said there was going to be some policy change or request of some policy change by the legislature. I'm correct?
No, sir, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Will the legislature have to make any adjustment to the employer or the member's contribution next year?
The board will recommend the employer contribution rate based on the evaluation that will be as of June 30, which will be presented to the board in October. Preliminarily, the board has looked at projections based on June 30, 2011 results, and those are reflected in the projections on page 30, which shows that the rate as of next year will go to 15.51 and then to 16.23 the following year. The board is looking to adopt a rate that is stable so there's not the volatility in the rate. And at this point, while not official, as I said, the consensus is adopting a rate of 15.75, which would attain a level of over 80% funded within 30 years.
So if in fact the board agree with what you just said, will there be an increase to the employer contribution and members contribution?
There will be an increase to the employer contribution.
Okay. Now, who paid the employer contribution?
The participating employers in PERS, the almost 900 employers who participate, the majority of which are public schools,
okay,
in your counties and cities and then state agencies.
Okay. Now, having said I got that, so if in fact the employer has to make that adjustment and have to pay that increase, how much is that amount going to be total? How much that amount will be? You have an idea?
How much will the dollar amount be?
How much would it be? Because it's my understanding, I think we pay it, at least for state employees, for legislators, and agencies. In my head, I don't know, some keep saying 50, some million.
The general fund, I think, was estimated at about 44 million, but I don't know that. Elbow staff could probably give you a better number as it relates to that.
So, there's a likelihood that the state would have to come up with 42, 50 million, 60 million, if in fact the board meets in October and take their recommendation.
Correct.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this, because I know when I get to Walmart, the lady gonna say, "Welcome Walmart, may I help you please? Now what about my 13 check?" Will the decision that the board make include or not include affect the COLA, which is pretty much the 13 check?
The cost of living adjustment, or the 13th check, is a statutory provision. In order to do any impact or change or have any impact on the cost of living adjustment as it is right now, you, as the members of the legislature, would have to make those changes to the statute. The board has no authority as it relates to the establishment or creation of benefits. The board's responsibility is to ensure that the benefits as enacted in statute and put in place by the legislature are adequately funded so those members and retirees will receive those benefits that they've been promised.
My last and final question, I think I got an understanding of. If in fact the legislature chooses not to come up with the 50-something, the 44 million or whatever it is, that responsibility would then be shifted, or will it be shifted to the members?
No, sir, it would be shifted to the budgets of the employer.
Okay, but we fund the budget, so in essence, it has to be, if they make this recommendation, they meet in October to make a recommendation, we're looking at a cost to the employer, which is the state of Mississippi as relates to state employees, anywhere near 44 to 50 million.
That's my understanding.
And I'm correct to say that only the legislature can freeze, decrease, or terminate the 13th check.
That is correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
Representative Moore.
Now, my question has to deal with the 15.75%. That's gone up, what, 25% from what it was a year ago. We were at 12%, and then we went to 12 point blah blah, and then we went to then July 1st of this year it jumped 14 point some odd percent, and we're looking at going up to 15.75%. And is the reason for this to push our unfunded liability down? What I mean, in the light of the economy go the way it is that actuarially what we're trying to do? We're trying to deteriorate some of the unfunded liability in the plan here at a time when resources are limited. And I'm just looking at this. If you're talking 25% of payroll here, by the time you consider the employees' contribution and the part that the taxpayers have to put into this thing.
Yes, sir, you are correct. The reason for the increase in the contribution rate has to do with the fact that from actuarial guidelines, you are trying to put some parameters on there to meet the guidelines as established currently by GASB, even though they're going away, that says that your unfunded accrued liability should be paid off within 30 years. You may remember that you were around in the past that when I brought these projections to you before, it showed that rate going up to as high as 18%. And we have had some success in the market. Last year, 25.4, the year before, 14.1. However, the primary cause for the increase in the contribution rates is the fact that the benefit increases that were passed in 1999, which were passed retroactively, akin to getting a raise and making it effective with the first day of work rather than the first of the next month, caused basically 10% of payroll, and there was no funding mechanism put in place. So we're trying, there was the expectation that we were in an economy where rates of returns were at 17, 18, 20%, and that was going to continue. Unfortunately, when you have assumed rate of return of 8%, and you've got rates of return that are exceeding that, at some point you're going to have a downturn so that it all averages out to 8%. So unfortunately, those benefits have not been paid for, and were not paid for at that time. So it's catching up with us now as the individuals who got those retroactive benefits increases, who were current day retirees, myself included. I had basically 20 years of service at the time, and that accrued benefit, my accrued benefit was worth 37.5% of my salary. Well, overnight, it went to being worth 40%. That's not particularly significant on an individual basis, but it is significant when you multiply it times 250 or 300,000. And that's part of where we are today. And changes have been made, as I said. New hires after July 1st, 2011 have to work 30 years. Their benefit formula is a little bit less. And as they work their way through the system, and those of us who got the benefits that weren't paid for work our way out of the system, it will correct itself. But that's a long time perspective. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen within 10 years.
Is the board looking at any recommendations back to the legislature to kind of stabilize this thing? I know you mentioned 18%, which is there's conceivable that if we're going up 1.5% a year, unless the economy turns around dramatically over the next 5 or 6 years, we could actually be pushed up over 22% of employer contributions if we stay on the same trend. Because there have been just a few short years where we're only 9% on the employer contribution, I believe. Isn't that right? A few years ago.
From 1990 to 2005, the employer contribution rate was 9.75%.
Okay.
And yes, the board is looking at it. That's one of the things the board started working on funding policy in December of last year to try to look at ways to mitigate the increase in the contribution rate and what could be done. Because the board members are very much aware, they represent these participating employers. They are very much aware of the impact that increasing the contribution rate has on the budgets of these employers. So, and that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier, and it's indicated on page 30, the 15.75% is a rate rather than going up to 16.23. Let's establish a rate and that we can live with that will get us to a legitimate relative funding position within 30 years, and we will not have to come back to you, our employers, and say we've got to go up again.
One final question. Of course, all the assumptions have been based on an 8% growth rate, right?
That is correct.
The historical growth rate is what, 8.9? Over the, I think I saw that figure in there on one of the charts. Was it 8.9 or 9%? What it's actually done over the years?
Over a 30-year period, 9.63, so a little bit better than 8%. Yes, sir.
Representative Snowden.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask about the assumed rate of return too. I noticed Mr. Pender over here wrote an article in Clarion this morning. This is about impact. I don't want to be apples and oranges here, but I noticed just coincidentally that program's investments for the past year was 0.6% too. And they say they've averaged 4.1% since inception, which I assume is the mid-90s when you catch all of that big growth. Their assumption apparently is 7.8% to stay in the black, which is a little bit smaller than the 8%, and they've chosen to freeze their program to make sure they're actuarially sound. And I see they've dropped from 83% funded to 76.8%. I guess what I'm getting at, how confident are we in the 8%? If you look, I know the 30-year average, but we just talked about how in the 90s the rates of returns were ridiculous. What about in the last 10 years? What are we averaging there? 6.2. In the last 5 years?
1.26.
All right. So, unless we have another 90s coming, it looks like we're sliding below 8%. That at some point, I know the board, I think last year, the year before last, considered lowering the 8%, I think at least to 7.75 or something like that. Chose not to do that at that time. Is the board looking at revisiting the 8% assumed rate?
We are. Two things that we're doing. One, the PERS board has an actuarial experience study done every 2 years on the prior 4 years, which looks at all the assumptions from an economic and demographic standpoint and makes necessary adjustments, for example, as it relates to mortality. In the past 4 to 6 year period, the economic assumption has been an area of concern. The board, as of the June 30, 2010 experience study, chose not to change the assumed rate of return because at that period in time we were looking at a longer-term performance of more than 8%, and because when you change that investment rate of return, you increase those liabilities, which increases the required contribution rate.
So if we were to go, say, 6%, I'm not suggesting we did that, but if we go to 6%, that'd be fairly dramatic. But if we were to adopt the assumed rate of return of 6%, you'd be asking employers for a lot more than 15% contribution to keep it sound.
In order to meet the standards that are in place today, yes.
Well, I know it's a very difficult sort of process, and we want to be sure, I'm sure, in planning our budgets, particularly long term, that we're being honest with ourselves about the amount of return we can legitimately expect, because like anything else, building in a budget, we pretend we got more than we do, and I'm not suggesting anybody pretending, I guess that, but we want to be as accurate as we can, because if we've got that rate of return too high, we're just fooling ourselves thinking this 15% is going to get us out of the hole we're in, when it may not in fact be.
And I agree with that, and the board will be looking at that. In addition to that, with our investment consultant, we are going to conduct an asset liability study to ensure that the way that we got our assets positioned, we are positioned in order to give us the best return, taking an adequate or acceptable amount of risk. So we will be looking at that. The experience study is as of June 30, 2012. It will be presented to the board in February, and we will be looking at that assumed rate of return. It has been a topic of discussion around the nation, as well as in conjunction with our funding policy. The actuary developed for us a modeling policy that we could put in different assumed rates of return, different scenarios, so that we could determine and look at what's the impact short-term and long-term. And basically, in most of these, even with changing the assumed rate of return, the impact is more short-term in nature than it is long-term. So if you're looking at that longer-term horizon and have worked your way through some of this, it's not as significant. So the short-term impact is where you see something occurring.
Finally, my last question, has there been any sort of, the COLA, the 13th check, it is a flat 3% a year that compounds. Has there been any study about if that were to go to some sort of cost, more true cost of living, say to a CPI of some sort, if it was indexed in that way, what sort of impact that would have pro or con as far as the payout and the contribution rate?
We have looked at different scenarios as it relates to, and in this modeling software that I'm talking about, that has the ability not necessarily to put CPI in there since we don't know what that is, but to put 2.5 or something like that in there. So, and we've also asked the actuary to give us additional information to add some programming to this projection software.
Thank you.
Senator Simmons.
Thank you. You've become more popular than Medicaid as far as a lot of the
I'm not sure it's popular.
inquiries. Sunday morning, my Sunday school, adult Sunday school class, prior to discussing Sunday school lesson, will talk about you after reading and seeing you on television. My question is, to make sure that what I heard you say is true, is that the board, based upon the survey that's been put together, will be making a recommendation in October. And that's primarily dealing with the employer's share of contribution and not necessarily recommending any increase for membership. Regardless to that, whatever the recommendation is, the legislative body has the responsibility or authority to accept or not accept. And the 13th checker code is in fact statutory, so we, the legislative body, is the one that will deal with that.
That is correct.
Then my question to the budget. It appears that 90% or close to it of your budget deals with contracted services and personnel costs, salary.
Correct.
And based upon what you gave us, many of your employees are nearing retirement, exit that way. A large percent of your employees, 15 of them, has exited in the last 12 months. So it appears that you have a challenge on hand in dealing with maintaining your staff and making sure that you have the ability to do and carry out the function, your mission in the future. So would you talk to us just a little bit about the impact of these exits and what happens if you're not able to fund your staff level of question?
Thank you for the question. Succession planning, I think, is an area that all state agency directors look at, and I know it's a huge concern to PERS and to me individually. I've been with PERS now, I'm in my 33rd year at PERS, and I care deeply about this agency and what we do, and we have been very fortunate, in my opinion, in the staff that we have. Our Chief Investment Officer, Lori Tingle, was with Trustmark Bank and worked in the trust area, working on our account. We were able to recruit her to come to the investment department. She is basically, as many of us have, grown up at PERS. She is a certified financial analyst, and I have to say, we've got in her area, there's a staff of 5. We are trying to grow our own, if you will. We are encouraging her staff to take the courses as it relates to the CFA, but it's very challenging to recruit and retain competent professionals in these areas because they can, honestly, they're not homegrown or already locked into the state service and the retirement system. They can go make a whole lot more money somewhere else. And so that is a concern and a challenge. We work on a regular basis to try to position succession planning and to make sure that we've got people that are coming behind we think we identify that can be leaders in the future. So all I can say is we're working it on a day-to-day basis, making sure that the people that we do recruit can step up and encourage them from a training standpoint and an education standpoint.
Do you have or utilize an internship program with our universities and colleges?
No, we've looked at that and talked about it, but we have not utilized those today.
Is that something you plan to do?
It's something that, like I said, we've talked with our HR department about, and I would like to, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Price.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. If our growth, historical growth has been like over 8%, is that correct?
Yes.
And that our employer and employee contributions have gone up in excess of 20%, then why are we only 62% funded?
Because the benefits were passed that cost 10% of payroll without a funding mechanism in place.
Another question is, what percent of accuracy is the 30-year projection based on? That we'll be back to 80% in 30 years. Is there a degree? What's the odds that we're going to make that? Like an economist will tell us there's a 20% chance of the nation going into a recession in the next 12 months. Well, can your actuary tell us what are the odds of us going to meet this projection in the next 30 years? Are they 2-1, 3-1, even money?
I honestly, and I can't entertain answer that question. That would be something I need to ask the actuary, and I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, because I think that's really important. If we're going to assume as a projection that certain things are going to happen, and a lot of people's retirement is based on that being correct, and legislature's ability to fund cities and the counties to pay their contributions. We need to know what we're dealing with.
And unfortunately, I think the answer that I'm going to get is that the actuarial projections are more art than science, and I'm not sure that he's going to give you a 50%, 80% probability, but I will ask the question.
They have to ask the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. They can probably come up with it for us. What of the new federal accounting standards that are going to go into effect this year, what impact will they have on the unfunded liability projection?
I'm assuming what you're talking about is the governmental accounting standards boards, GASB 67 and 68, which will go into effect FY 2014 for the plan, meaning our financial statements, and FY 2015 for the individual employers. And what that's going to do is going to have absolutely no impact as it relates to the funding of the plan or the calculation of the liabilities. The impact is that it will, rather than the participating employers today, if they do not fund the required contribution as calculated, have to show a liability on the face of their financials that indicates the difference between what was required and what was funded, if there is a difference. In Mississippi, you typically have not had a difference, so there's been no liability on the face of the employer financial statements. GASB 68 will require employers to report their proportionate share of the liability on the face of the financial statements. So in other words, there will be a number on the financial statements of each employer that represents what the long-term liability, the long-term unfunded portion of the liability is for each employer.
So it won't impact the 63% funding?
No, sir.
Change that number?
No, sir. One of the things that GASB said when they did this is that it's basically they're looking at accounting and not funding, so it's been referred to as a divorce between accounting and funding.
Okay. And the board is aware that the unfunded liability counts towards the total liability of the state of Mississippi in our capacity to borrow money and issue bonds and things like that.
Yes.
What percent of the payout what percent of the total payout every year is just COLA? You know that number?
I have not calculated that, but I would say it's roughly a third. I haven't calculated it exactly. We paid out in 2012, we paid $1.9 billion total. The COLA, the cost of living adjustment, represented $400 million. So somebody that's better at math than me, if you can divide
20%.
20%.
Roughly.
Math is not my strong suit, so.
Thank you. Senator Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Help me remember some things here, if you would please, Pat. The PERS board can approve an employer increase in the contribution rate, I think. I'm right on that. But only through legislation can the employee contribution rate be increased. Is that correct?
Well, I think if you look at the legal interpretation, the board may increase either or based on the valuation.
But then federal law require that any increase in employee contribution rate also require an increase in benefit?
There is, contractual law has basically held that in order to increase the employee contribution rate, there has to be an offsetting or corresponding benefit associated with that.
So you can't say we're going to increase this because it might offset, it's got to offset it.
And in fact, in the state of Florida, which was a non-contributory system up until just recently, meaning that employees did not contribute to the plan to help fund it, they increased the employee contribution rate to 3%. That has been challenged in the court, and it was held for the employees that they could not, because they did not. Now, as it relates to any contractual issues, each individual state is different, and there's nothing that you can say that's universally applicable to Mississippi based on another state.
Representative Smith, you have a question?
I was going to, but I think we probably need to move on.
Representative Black?
It relates to what Senator Kirby said. Is a contract agreement, meaning the retirement plan is a contract agreement between the members and the system. Can the legislature retroact any policy as relates to the retirement contract with the state?
That's a legal question, one I'm not qualified to answer.
But you know of no state that's ever been able to successfully meet court challenges by retroacting any, meaning, and what I'm trying to say, I'm not, all right, let me see if I can do it in layman's terms. If anybody is planning to retire July 1st, 2013, it's nothing this legislature can do to reduce that benefit package that they came in on, right?
Well, let me give you a couple things. One, I think the legislature can do what they did want to do. Whether or not it would survive a legal challenge is a different question. And I can tell you that in Colorado, Minnesota, and South Dakota, changes were made to the cost of living adjustments for current retirees in each of those states. Now, each of those states' law, statutory framework is different than it is in Mississippi. In Colorado, each of their retirees had signed a piece of paper that basically said that they understood their cost of living adjustment could increase in the future. There's NCSL has a very good webinar, if you will, I think it was last summer session or last fall session, on the contractual and constitutional rights as it relates and the challenges that have been made. That if you wanted to get a little more information as it related to that, you might want to check out. It's, if you go on their website under, I think it's their last year fall seminar, fall something, you can find it, or I can send it to you.
Governor Reed has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just so I understand what I'm looking at, let me begin by asking, you said that if the employer contribution rate is increased that to the 15.75, that we would reach a funding status of at least 80% within 30 years. Is that correct?
Well, actually, what I said was it's projected to be over 80%.
Is 80% funded a reasonable goal to have, and one which most defined benefit plans would consider reasonable?
What I can say is I would be very pleased today if we were at 80% funded.
Thank you. Now, page 26 or 27. I believe it shows the actuarial value funded ratio for the last 31 years. Is it correct to say that as of 2011, that ratio is at 62%?
That is correct.
And is it correct to say over the last 31 years, the funding ratio has been in excess of 83% twice in 31 years?
That is correct. Well, actually, in excess of 83%.
Yes.
That is correct.
In 1998 and 2001, we've exceeded funding status of 83% only twice in 31 years. The final question that I have, Mr. Speaker, Ms. Robertson, is did you say that the primary reason that we currently find ourselves at a funding ratio of 62% is because benefit enhancements that occurred in 1999 that was voted on not by the board but by the legislature and had no funding mechanism associated with them?
In my opinion, yes, because had the funding mechanism been put in place at that time, the contribution rate would have gone immediately from 9 3/4 to 19 3/4%. So you would have accumulated and had those assets on hand to fund those benefits.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Ms. Robertson? I don't see any. Ms. Robertson, we thank you for your patience. Thank you for answering the questions. You had a good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to proceed with the Department